Wait, you're a Bears fan and you're not subscribed to my channel? Before this video starts, make sure to 1. Hit the subscribe button below to catch all Bears content right here on this podcast. 2. Hit the bell notification because you, my friend, are a diehard Bears fan. And 3. Like this video and tell all the Bears fans you know about the channel. Alright, that's better. Now that you're actually subscribed to the channel, make sure to bear down and enjoy this video.
Now this is a podcast all about Bears. You either cheering for this team or just pulling your hair. I like to take a minute, just sit right back and tell you how I became the #1 Bears fan.
That boy is Benny Hunter.
Cake on the mic, cake on the mic, cake on the mic, cake on the mic. People, this the intro. Sacramento, California, born and raised. And Antelope is where I spend most of my days. Talk bad about my team, you must be a clown. This is Keek on the mic, so you know you better bear down. Bear down.
Hey, what's going on, Bears fans? Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Keek on the Mic, the podcast all about the Chicago Bears. Before I get this episode started, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification to catch all Bears content right here on the podcast. Make sure you follow me on all my social media platforms. And make sure you share this episode of Keek on the Mic with every single Bears fan that you know. So as most of you guys already know, the trade deadline is set for tomorrow at 3 p.m. So will the Bears sell? I know that's been a question going around the Bears community for the last couple of weeks, especially after yesterday's loss against the San Francisco 49ers. The Chicago Bears are now sitting at 3-5. So are they going to buy or are they going to sell? They're not really in a position to buy for many reasons. We don't have the draft capital. We don't have the cap space. But we do have a lot of trade chips that we can trade out and sell and gain draft capital and maybe even cap space. So the Chicago Bears need to sell. And I know that's tough for a lot of Bears fans to say right now or even think about. And it's tough for me to sit here on this podcast and say that. But it's about time for the Chicago Bears to think about their future, to think about what they have on the team now, right? When you look at the Chicago Bears now, we are building around Justin Fields. Justin Fields is the future of the Chicago Bears. Of course, you have Darnell Mooney, Roquan Smith, Jalen Johnson, which are other pieces on the team that you won't trade away. Those are the future of the Chicago Bears. But overall, what is best for Justin Fields? After looking at yesterday's performance, obviously, there's a lot of defensive players that we can think about trading, right? But overall, the Chicago Bears should be huge sellers at the deadline as we near closer to that deadline tomorrow at 3 p.m. And will they sell? We don't know. You know, maybe they sit here quietly and who knows with Ryan Pace. But if they do opt to do that, to me, that's kind of dumb. Because there's a lot of good teams, a lot of contenders that would love to have some of our players to help them maybe win a championship, right? And it would be a win-win for us, right? Of course, we're not winning anything this year. So the Chicago Bears should sell, gain some draft capital, especially when you're looking at next year's draft. We only have 5 total draft picks and no first-round picks. And I'm not sitting here saying that we will gain a first-round pick. But we definitely need to think about maybe getting some more picks so we can load up for next year's draft and build around Justin Fields. So on today's podcast, I'm going to give you guys the 5 players the Chicago Bears should consider trading. And this is tough for me because, of course, it is a business. But at the end of the day, I do love all the Chicago Bears players. They've been playing hard. It just hasn't been going our way. Unfortunately, the coaching's just not there. As a team, we're just not there right now. So the Chicago Bears may consider rebuilding, right? And with some of these players on this list, right, if you trade them away, that is giving us fans a message, right, that the Chicago Bears are definitely rebuilding and building around Justin Fields, the future at quarterback. And will these trades happen? Probably not. This is just who I would trade to gain some draft capital and start trying to rebuild this team around Justin Fields, right? So starting off with number 1, obviously, this is the obvious. Allen Robinson, and this one hurts because he is a true professional. Allen Robinson has not been disgruntled at all. He's came and played and just been a true professional. But the problem is that through the first 7 games, Allen Robinson has had 23 catches for 250 yards and 1 touchdown. And what makes it even worse is that him and Justin Fields just cannot find a connection. In yesterday's game against the 49ers, he only had 3 catches for 21 yards. So I am not sure why the connection is taking so long. I understand that Justin Fields didn't have a lot of first-team reps in the offseason, but it's still a huge mystery in why they are not able to connect. Obviously, the Bears and Robinson have been dealing with contract issues. We weren't able to get a long-term deal. So at this point, I don't think Allen Robinson's going to sign back with the Chicago Bears anyways. And what's the point of franchise tagging a guy that is not really involved in the offense, right? So I would look to trade Allen Robinson and get something back in return, right? And when I look at teams that could actually use Allen Robinson, I would trade Allen Robinson to the Colts for a second-round pick. And a second-round pick in return for Allen Robinson would be great value for the Chicago Bears. That would give the Chicago Bears 2 second-round picks in next year's draft. And, of course, we all love Allen Robinson, but at this point, I think we all know it's coming. I think the Chicago Bears should trade away Allen Robinson and give him a chance to go to a team that's going to utilize him a little bit better. Because at this point, the Chicago Bears just don't use Allen Robinson. Player number 2 is Robert Quinn. And I know Robert Quinn has been playing good football, right? But that even makes him a better trade chip for the Chicago Bears. Obviously, Quinn has 5.5 sacks this season, which is already, I believe, double the amount he had last year. So Quinn's value is definitely up right now. If you are looking to maybe go in a rebuild, obviously the defense looked terrible yesterday against the 49ers. So if you're looking to go in a rebuild, you need to trade guys that teams like maybe like the Cardinals or just contending teams may need on their defensive end of the football, right? To get them over the top to win a championship, right? So when I look at Robert Quinn, I think that his value is a little bit higher. And when I look at contending teams that can really use him, I would trade Robert Quinn to the Dallas Cowboys for a 3rd-round pick. And you guys may think it's crazy that we would get a 3rd-round pick back, but I think that's where his value is right now. When you look at the Cowboys, they're a contending team. They have a pretty good defense. Obviously, that's where Robert Quinn came from when he had that 11.5 sack season, right? So the Cowboys can get Robert Quinn back, add him to the mix to that already pretty stout defense, and we get another good pick in the 3rd round, which if Ryan Pace is our GM, that's where he thrives, is from the 3rd to the 5th round, right? So that would be good value for us. And the plus side about this is that we would possibly get that $11 million cap hit off our book. So not only will we get a good value with a 3rd-round pick, we'd also get some much-needed cap space. So to go for the future of the Chicago Bears, because if you think about it, this is not all about the draft, right? We could also get some cap room back to sign maybe some quality free agents to maybe up the rebuild a little bit, right? So that's what you have to think about in this process. And it's tough that we may trade some of these guys at the end of the day, but we have to understand this is what is best for the Chicago Bears. Player number 3, and this is another, to me, no-brainer at this point, Akiem Hicks. Akiem Hicks, and this is a tough one for me because I truly love Akiem Hicks. He's the heart and soul of the Chicago Bears defense, but he's in the last year of his contract, and he's just been dealing with injuries. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, but he's still really valuable, once again, for a contending team. I said this before about Akiem Hicks in past podcasts, but I made it very clear that if Akiem Hicks can come out and have a resurgent year and play good football and stay healthy, yes, I would give Akiem Hicks another little deal, but that hasn't been the case. When he's off the field, he hurts us, right? Because we need him in the game. But when he's actually on the field, he just hasn't been there, right? He hasn't produced, and obviously he can't do everything by himself, but he's just not the same player, right? And he's in the last year of his deal. And ultimately, if he's on and off the field, what's going to end up happening is that he's going to walk in free agency. We're not going to re-sign him. So I would try to push to get some draft capital from him. So a team that makes sense for Akiem Hicks is I would trade Akiem Hicks to the Los Angeles Chargers for a 4th-round pick. Obviously, they have Brandon Staley there. He would be familiar with the defense. Obviously, the Chargers are kind of in the mix of, I think, kind of being a contending team, a pretty good team that can maybe make a little bit of noise in the playoffs. And I think Akiem Hicks would fit well with that Chargers defense. And once again, it would be good value for the Bears getting a 4th-round pick in return and just adding to the draft capital so we can build around Justin Fields. Ultimately, it would be tough losing Akiem Hicks, but at the end of the day, it is a business. My fourth player on my list, and I think a lot of Bears fans will agree with me on this one, is Eddie Jackson. Ever since Eddie Jackson got paid, it seems like he just disappeared. And when he got hurt on the very first play yesterday, it really broke me, because it's like I was rooting for Eddie Jackson. I was hoping that he would, have a rebound year after a couple off years. It just hasn't come together. He just has really, really struggled. And I think it may be time to cut ties with Eddie Jackson, which is tough because you just gave him that big contract, and you expect to keep guys like Eddie Jackson, right? Because he was so good in 2018. He was a ball hawk safety. He was always near the ball. And it just hasn't been the same. Something just hasn't been clicking. So the Bears, honestly, you never know. They may not be able to trade Jackson. Maybe no one would want him. But there may be some teams out there. And the one team that makes sense for me is the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, the Baltimore Ravens have dealt with so many lingering injuries, especially in the secondary. And I would trade Eddie Jackson to the Ravens, and I would try to get a 4th-round pick for Eddie Jackson. And obviously, he's a veteran. He can go fit in right away with that Baltimore Ravens defense. Once again, they're a contending team. You had I would say, a still pretty good veteran in Eddie Jackson. Maybe a change of scenery would be good for Eddie Jackson in this case. And we would get a good value with a 4th-round pick, and once again, add draft capital to hopefully start this rebuild for the Chicago Bears. The last one on my list, and I know this is just me kind of just going on top of the dome now, right? This is if we're going to do a full massive rebuild. Obviously, this may not happen, so don't attack me too much for this one. But my 5th player on my list is Khalil Mack. And the only reason why I'm saying Khalil Mack is if you're going to do a massive rebuild, right? Let's say you're going to do a rebuild where you're going to fire Matt Nagy, fire Ryan Pace, right? I doubt it happens. And you're saying, you know what? We're going to build around Justin Fields, and that's our main priority. You may consider trading Khalil Mack, especially if a team knocks on the door offering a 1st-round pick. We don't have a 1st-round pick in next year's draft. And obviously, you're not going to be able to replace Khalil Mack. But you would gain a 1st-round pick, maybe a couple extra picks, and maybe even a player, and you would get some of that money off your cap, because Khalil Mack brings along a massive cap hit, and it's worth every penny. Don't get me wrong. I love Khalil Mack. But at the end of the day, when you look at this defense, there's a lot of money being invested into this defense, and we're losing with them. We're losing with Khalil Mack. He's a big player on this team. He's the best player on our football team. But at the end of the day, we are still losing with Khalil Mack. So, and I also look at it as this can be a huge respect thing for Khalil Mack, right? Of course, we want to keep him, but I would go to Khalil Mack and say, you know what? You deserve a ring. We want to send you to a contender, right? Where would you like to go? Or we can ask him, do you really want to stay with the Chicago Bears? If he says yes, of course, we'll keep him. We'll love to have him in Chicago. But at the end of the day, if you can get a 1st-round pick and maybe a couple extra picks for Khalil Mack still at the age of 30, I think I would trade away Khalil Mack. And that really hurts me to say that. But at the end of the day, it is a business, and you can get picks to build for your future and around Justin Fields. So one team that makes sense, especially now, is I would trade Khalil Mack to the Arizona Cardinals for a 1st, a 3rd, and a next year 2nd-round pick. Obviously, they just lost J.J. Watt for the year. Arizona is definitely a contending team. You add Khalil Mack to the Arizona Cardinals, I think that would definitely put them over the top. Because at the end of the day, I think Khalil Mack is definitely a little bit better than J.J. Watt at this point in their careers. So, like I said, it would hurt at the moment. But when you look at the long term, you're not going to be able to replace him. I understand that. But you would get a lot of draft capital for him. And this would set us up, hopefully, for future years with all the draft capital and, of course, getting some cap space back as well. So these are my 5 players that I would consider trading. Obviously, will they happen? Probably not. But this is just my opinion on it. I think the Bears should be big sellers. I mentioned it in yesterday's podcast. Right now, we don't need to think about playoffs right now. Of course, we want to win football games. But at the moment, we have to think what's best for the Chicago Bears. They are now 3-5, and they're about to go play a Pittsburgh Steelers team that has won 3 straight, playing really good football. So the trade deadline is tomorrow. We'll see what they do. But like always, Let me know your opinions. Who would you consider trading? And do you think the Chicago Bears should be sellers at this year's trade deadline? But before I let you guys go, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification to catch all Bears content around the podcast. Make sure you follow me on all my social media platforms. And make sure you share this episode of Keek on the Mic with every single Bears fan that you know. But other than that, I'll be back for an all-new Bears podcast right here on Keek on the Mic. Thanks, guys, and bear down.
You ain't bout it, you ain't bout it, you ain't Keek on the mic. You ain't bout it, you ain't bout it, you ain't Keek on the mic. You can go and subscribe, cause I be on it right. You ain't bout it, you ain't bout it, you ain't Keek on the mic.